Yeah, I think so. I think we'll get going, Tracy, and I'll
Right.
keep an eye on this as we go along.
So welcome everybody. I think we've got about 34 people here and we're expecting closer to 60. So I think if you've gone to Teams and then found your way to Zoom, well done. I hope other people manage to do that as well. We're obviously not going to go around and get everybody to introduce themselves this morning because it'd take a bit of time, but if you can put who you are and where you're from in the chat, that would be really helpful so everybody's got a sense of who's here. For those who don't know me, I'm Tracy Hopkins. My day job is as Chief Executive of Citizens Advice in Blackpool, and I work as part of the VCFSE Alliance along with colleagues to really kind of interface and work in partnership with the Integrated Care Board. So I also sit on the Integrated Care Board representing the VCFSE. I'm also part of the Integrated Care Partnership along with Angela Allen, who's also here today, who's the Vice Chair of that partnership. Just as really as a way of an introduction to today's meeting, I suppose the theme around today is very much around working in partnership. And you'll see from the agenda that we've got Jane Cass, who's joined us from the ICB, who we've been working really closely with to develop a partnership agreement between the VCFSE and the ICB. Many of you have been involved in that. And I know Joe has very much been driving the development of that, bringing people together. And now we're at the point where that agreement is about to go to the ICB next week. And obviously being brought to this meeting is really important. But also when we think about partnerships, we've also got quite a few things on the agenda where we're talking about how we work in partnership across the VCFSE. So there'll be updates around the task and finish groups that are operating at the moment, which is very much around us coming together, working collaboratively to really tackle some of those kind of system pressures that are apparent at the moment that we all know are very, very difficult for the NHS to face alone. So I'm chairing a group that, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, looking at discharge from hospital, looking at that transfer of care for people who are medically fit to leave hospital. And that is one of 4 task and finish groups that I would urge you to get involved in if you're interested in working to work up proposals to solve some of those problems as a sector. So that's all I'm going to say by way of an introduction. I hope that sort of frames the meeting today and the way we've planned this. Obviously, there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to have input. It's difficult, I think, when Joe's trying to do all the tech and manage all the kind of other side of the meeting. But if you do want to put questions in the chat, we will pick them up, I think, between us. We won't just rely on Joe to do 6 things at once. I will keep an eye on it. So please do put questions in the chat as we go along. And as I said, there will also be opportunities for you to discuss some of the issues on the agenda. So really great to see you all. I'm going to hand you back to Joe now to kind of run through what's next. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. So let's share my screen so we get the agenda up. Although you have this in your packs. So that was Tracy's welcome introduction. Just a reminder that we have on the Healthier Lancashire and South Cumbria websites, we have our section with the Voluntary Sector Alliance and Assembly, the recordings of all of these meetings and what have you go on there, and any news that we get, as well as opportunities to be involved going on there, and it's being developed as we go along. Any suggestions about that would be usefully received to me as well. Today, as Tracy said, the final draft is in the pre-meeting pack. That's going to be taken as read. However, after we hear from Jane Cass, Partnerships and Collaborations Director for the ICS, we will have an opportunity, if I can get the breakout rooms to work, which another gremlin that I'm dealing with at the moment, then we'll hopefully go into breakout rooms for iterating some of that and getting us towards an implementation plan. So as Tracy said, the partnership agreement has been through a process since the last assembly, so that was in February. Approximately 35 organisations from the assembly have been involved so far, and on the 17th of March we have a supported workshop supported by NHS England and NAVCA at Chorley House, which was resulted in the document you've got in your packs. It's been a good process so far, and after we hear from Jane with the ICB view and next steps from their perspective, we'll then talk about our how we're going to have an implementation plan for developing that. So without further ado, I will stop sharing that screen, and we'll hear from Jane. We might not hear from Jane. Can we hear from Jane?
I don't think Jane's sound is working, because I can see that you're speaking, Jane, but it's not coming through.
Oh no, how frustrating. Jane, do you want to leave and come back? Yeah, let's do that.
Joe, are you able to share the partnership agreement on screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
It might just be a good starting point.
Can you see that, Tracy?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so this is the partnership agreement that we've got worked up, and it's this that will go to the ICB board on May the 3rd. Am I right there, Tracy, with the date for the ICB
yes,
board
next
meeting?
Wednesday.
Yeah. In anticipation of what Jane's going to say, I do know that this has been through and around the Integrated Care Board directors and executive team, with some feedback shared. Has Jane joined? Jane, can we hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yay!
we can hear you. Oh, thank goodness.
I'm so sorry. The NHS are notoriously difficult with Zoom. We usually use Teams, so I'm really sorry about those technical issues. But I was able to hear you, Joe, and the kind of the preamble in advance. So, are you happy for me to continue?
Please do, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. My name's Jane Cass. I'm Director of Partnerships and Collaboration with the Integrated Care Board, and I've been part of that small team that Tracy described earlier, to really think through how we work together in a much more strategic way through the ICB with the organisations in the voluntary, community, faith and social enterprise sector. It's really important, I think, for me to just acknowledge that the relationship that you've had pre-ICB has not been ignored. Many of you will have worked with clinical commissioning groups before, or will have had relationships with the NHS previously. So it's not a new one, but the Integrated Care Board is really seeking to build on those relationships and to establish more robust and longer term partnership agreements, a much more strategic way of working. So we can work together, we can co-design solutions, and actually we can be part of the same driver for change and for improving outcomes for our patients and citizens across Lancashire and South Cumbria. The co-produced partnership agreement, I think, and I hope you'll agree once you have a chance to read through it, it reflects a much more ambitious way of working between the Integrated Care Board and the sector. It does set out that commitment to work together in partnership and to meet the diverse needs of the population that we serve across LSC. And I think it's also really important that we set out in that partnership agreement the values and principles that we want to sign up to, and to really underpin and be the foundations for our ways of working. partnership agreement does set out, excuse me, those conditions for working together. And I think it will really help us to develop that strategic way of working in the future. So as has been mentioned, we did hold that workshop in March of this year. And for those who were part of that, they will recognise that it was a reorganised workshop because snow got in the way with the first workshop that we had planned. And it was really great to see so many people in the room who really wanted to be part of developing the agreement and having an input in terms of what a partnership agreement should look like, and actually the principles and ways of working that we really want to hold each other to account on. Following the development of that workshop and the draft of the document, I then shared that with colleagues in the Integrated Care Board. And I think that was really important because you will work with a number of colleagues and teams in the ICB on a range of issues. So what I did was I asked them to review the partnership agreement and to test out 3 areas. The first one is, if we were to sign up to the agreement, how will this be applied to your area of work? Have we missed anything? And is there anything in the agreement that we weren't able to sign up to? And I think really positively, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the feedback was really positive because there was a firm commitment to the proposed agreement. I did receive some feedback, and that was included in the final agreement that you have in your pack. But I'll just go through a couple of those and share those with you. I think they are really positive, and I'm sure you'll agree once I run through those. The first one was that we felt that we needed to strengthen the principle of co-production, and that's a real statement in terms of how we want to work in the future. That commitment to do things together as strategic partners, and for the sector not to feel done to, but for us to really harness the knowledge, experience that you have, your relationships that you have with the communities that you serve and the groups that you work with, and the knowledge of things that work and things that perhaps importantly don't work, and really think about how we co-produce the outcomes together. A real increased focus on creativity. Can we do things differently? And if we can, how can we test out those new ways to improve the outcomes for our population? An increase in the emphasis of identifying priorities together. And those priorities really should be the focus for change and co-designing new service models and doing that together, not for the ICB to do it alone and then to seek ways of engaging or consulting, but let's sit in the room and do it together. And there was a real sense that we need to do the sector justice by strengthening the reference to the diversity of the sector and, importantly, the assets that are in the community. And I think we've done that in the partnership agreement. I hope you'll agree. We wanted to in the partnership agreement, to strengthen our shared commitment to community empowerment and to really focus on that as we start to work through the next 12 months for the partnership agreement together. And for the ICB to be more explicit in its commitment to longer term, more stable funding models that tackle the challenges that we're facing together. And I think, again, we've done that in the partnership agreement. I think it's acknowledged that there is still some work to do. This is a partnership agreement between the Integrated Care Board across the Lancashire and South Cumbria system and with the sector. But we recognise that this is our first draft, I guess, our first iteration. And that's the proposal that we'll be making to the Integrated Care Board, that we will iterate this as we go through the coming months and hopefully into years. Many of you will not just work across Lancashire and South Cumbria, but you'll be absolutely instrumental in working at each of our 4 places. And the place infrastructure, you will know, is developing rapidly. So it's really important that the commitment from the ICB through this partnership agreement is also replicated within each of the 4 places. And I know that this partnership agreement has been shared in the places, and it's certainly been shared with our 4 directors of health and care integration, who've given some really great feedback to help us to finalise the partnership agreement. And I think as we develop our ways of working together, we can also show this in the partnership agreement that reflects maturity in our ways of working, in our partnership working together. And I think certainly the small group who's been working on this, we recognise recognise that this will iterate. We'll see this develop as we move forward, and that's certainly the proposal that we'll be making. So our next steps from an integrated care board perspective is that the agreement will now be presented by Tracy, who will be at the board meeting on next Wednesday. And that will be presented for endorsement by the board, and a recognition of our commitment to work together as set out in the document. And certainly I don't see any aversion to that. It's been absolutely supported by the Integrated Care Board, and a real excitement of the next steps of how we work together in the future. Jo, Tracy, I'll pause there, but happy to take any comments if appropriate.
Thanks, Jane. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Jane at this point? No? Oh, just waiting for some hands if there are any. David Allen.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, and thanks, Jane. That's a really positive opener and really welcome. I just wanted to ask about the partnership agreement. I'm frantically checking my emails and I don't seem to be able to find it. So it's really a question for Jo. Have we been sent a pack, Jo? There's a reference to it on the invitation, but I can't find it, and the chat is saying that several other people are in the same boat.
Yeah, I think this is possibly a little bit down to the processes of going through Eventbrite. The event's on Eventbrite and registered through Eventbrite, and then that's how the packs come out. The idea being that it goes to the people who have signed up rather than being out just for anyone to see. So
I did sign up through Eventbrite.
Okay, right. Well, I can absolutely do that now. I'll send that to you guys. My apologies about this, but it's been a little bit of a scrappy one, this one, and apologies.
Thank you, Jo.
Some people saying that people have got it. The link for the back is on Eventbrite, so I'm feeling a bit reassured that we do have it there. Anyway, okay, Tracy.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, thanks, Jane, for presenting that, because I think it's really important, and it's really great that you've come along today to talk to the Assembly, because it's really important that we start kind of as we mean to go on. But I sort of say that with a little bit of hesitance, because I don't think this is a start. I think this is, in many ways, this agreement is a culmination of a lot of work that I know a lot of colleagues who are on this call have been involved in for quite a few years. And I just wanted to really say how pleased I am to see this now come into kind of this agreement that there's definitely been something that's been co-produced. So we've even started working on the principles that we've put in the agreement to get to the stage of having this agreement. So it does feel very different than previous iterations of working in partnership with public services, because what's happened in the past often is, as a sector, we kind of pull together a set of values and principles, it's sort of presented, and this has been a very different process. And I just feel that there's been so much input from both the ICB side and the VCFSE side within this process, that I sense the opportunities in this now. And I think one of the key things around co-production that we've really started to live and demonstrate is that if we are going to come together and we are going to work in that kind of ethos of co-production, then it is about making sure that not only are we listened to, but a lot of what we suggest is acted upon. And I think it was really positive to hear you talk about the shift to a more creative way of doing things, and also that mindset shift, I suppose, to a different way of funding us, which is much more sustainable. So I think that although this does feel very much like a start, it's kind of been going on in the background for a number of years. But I also think it poses now a really fantastic opportunity for those partnerships to be far more solidified, and for us to have that framework to work within. So So yeah, thank you for coming and presenting that, and for everything that you've done in terms of working with your colleagues in the ICB. And also, I think, Joe, you know, there's been a lot of work that's happened across the sector to get to this stage, not just in recent months, I think throughout the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So yeah, it does feel like a really positive place to be at the moment. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Can I just come back, Joe, if that's okay? I think what Tracy has just described is really important in that, you know, I didn't just come in and start this from scratch. There was so much work that had happened previously. But I guess for me, I was really fortunate in that the sector, through Tracy, Joe and others, and Angela and others, were really keen to kind of pick this up and progress at pace. So I think, you know, the product is great, and it is a product. It's incumbent on all of us to kind of bring it to life now. And there is something here, isn't there, about mutual accountability, holding each other to account in a really supportive and constructive way, and just checking back, are we living what we signed up to through the partnership agreement? And if we're not, how do we work together to make that, you know, as we set out for it to be? We won't get this right all of the time. I'm absolutely certain of that. But I think we're developing a really robust and trusting relationship to enable us to hold each other to account positively. And I think that's a great way of working.
Great, thank you very much. The next step on the process for today is to go into breakout rooms, but in common with the way that today is going, those are not working. You'll be delighted to hear. So I hope everybody's feeling sorry for me and not just secretly laughing at me. I'm afraid that I cannot put us into breakout rooms. It's just not working. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take a minute. I'm going to take a breather. And I'm going to suggest that what I do is I stop this meeting and send you all another invite, or we can just go for it now with everybody in the room. There are only 45 of us. So, Tracy, what do you think? Angela?
I was just going to say, why don't we just have a discussion en masse? I think everyone will be interested in each of the priority areas to a degree. It may not be your particular area of expertise, but I think you've all got something to say about each of the priorities. So I would suggest let's just crack on with it, Joe. And by the way, it's both. We are feeling sorry for you and laughing at you at the same time.
Thank you. I think there's a word for that. Okay, great.
I agree. I think that's probably the best way to go. Yeah, if everybody's happy to go with that. And as Angela said, you know, I think feeding back anyway across the whole of what's been happening is a good way to go, because it does give that transparency and people then can see what's happening right across the board. So yeah, I think we'll do that, Joe. And don't worry, we're all in it with you. It's not just you.
I'm sweating. Okay, right. So the idea was that we would have a discussion about the partnership agreement as is, and that you would then have some ideas, presuming that you've managed to read it, about what you see as the next steps. And the reason for that being important is that we obviously need an implementation plan for how this partnership agreement becomes real. And we also have review stages built into this partnership agreement. So how we were planning to do it was that there would be a discussion around the key parts. Sorry, Peter Lumpton, I've just seen your message. The priority areas, no, not the same as the task and finish groups. This is about the sections of the partnership agreement. So there's a lot of preamble in there around the purpose and the scope. I don't think, unless anybody is going to jump in at this point, I don't think anybody's going to be having any sort of issues with any of those. So I think the main purpose starts with the shared vision and mission, the shared values, which we've already workshopped, the joint principles of working our culture, and then the most important part, which is the shared commitments. So they start on page 6 of the PDF document and page 4 of the agreement in your pack. Okay, so I think what we'll do with this, it will be very strict about not jumping in. This will be a hands up, and I will go with who brings the hands up first. And I think if it's the key thing, I think, is the shared commitments, but prepared to be challenged on that. My thoughts are that the key commitments, the shared ones across the top, and the individual ones around VCS sector commitments and ICB commitments would be the key ones. And if you don't feel comfortable putting the points, on screen, as it were, then please use the chat function as well, because all of this is unfortunately recorded. So everybody's going to see this in future. So please use the chat as well. That will be helpful. So if it's all right with everybody, we'll start now, and we'll take this for half an hour. So we will finish this at 11:03. And we'll then move into the next bits. And I'm just, because of people's times, I'm going to switch the agenda around. So we'll go to the place things first, because Terry Stevenson, who is reporting about Lancashire, has to leave at 11:25. So we'll go there first. All right. Thank you. So in order, we've got Dave Clayton, Angela Allen, Colin Ranshaw, and Lucy Hamlin. Dave, go ahead, please.
Hello. Yeah, first of all, this is nice to see everyone in a room, and this is actually developing, so that's good. It's good. My only concern, from my experiences of working with the NHS in the politest possible way, is it's a competitive environment for staff within the NHS, so they all want to look good. So then they potentially meet community organisations like myself, and then instead of working with us, they take our ideas and then try to implement it within the NHS. So there needs to be something around that, like personal agenda kind of thing. And, this isn't about somebody trying to further their career within the NHS. It's actually working with the community to further the career anyway. But it's, that's just an experience that we've come across in terms of, I'm going to say stealing our ideas and work, but all ideas are stolen at some point. It's just a thing of, when you're trying to build something, why not involve the people who know how to build it, which is exactly what this is. And my only concern is that, and I think that just needs addressing, and sort of like a point making, to whichever staff member we work with. It's about you not going away and using our information and knowledge and experience to then create it yourself. It's exactly what we're trying to do here, you know what I mean? And yeah, that's it. I have lots of concerns, but that's my main one. But yeah.
Thanks, Dave. When you say you have lots of concerns, are they about this document, or are they in general?
No, just in general.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's I've noted that. Thank you, Dave. Next is Angela Allen.
In reaction to Dave, I don't think it happens just with NHS colleagues. I think we do it in the sector, steal good ideas. So I think it is something to address. And co-production is in this document, but it probably needs a bit more, background to that and what we actually mean by that. So I would agree with that. I have no issue with this document, but been part of kind of the journey of it. I think what it needs, though, is what does it mean for me kind of subtext to it. And having been at the Blackburn with Darwin Place meeting yesterday, we talked around, it wasn't partnership agreement, it was more around the terms of reference for that group. And yeah, making it, for those, most of us understand the wording in this document and we know what the big words mean, but actually, and I'm not downplaying the intelligence of other organizations, but if you're a very small voluntary group operating within one neighborhood and one community, what does this document mean to those organizations? So it's not a simple read we need, it's more of a, what does this mean for me? So that we are making sure that all VCFSE organizations understand that this document is for them as well as the larger organizations operating across the geography. So I think it's the next stage of this that we try and get something that, you know, draws it out to be inclusive. And, you know, I think if we can get some volunteers to help make that a reality, that would be a good next step.
Thanks very much, Angela. It's really helpful again around this implementation plan, and thank you for making the point about volunteers, because I skipped that off my little spiel. Obviously, at the end of every assembly, I'm asking for volunteers to help with stuff, as Kirsty Fanshawe well knows. Thank you for that. Next one is Colin Ranshaw.
Thanks, Joe. Just to let you know, I've also just had an email from somebody else that's been waiting 20 minutes to get in on MS Teams. I hope I've directed her in the right direction now. So you may still have other people still trying to get in. My name's Colin Ranshaw, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm speaking as chairman on this now of South Lakeland Hydrotherapy Trust, which is a smallish charity for providing hydrotherapy services, working in with the IMSK community service at UHMBT Morecambe Bay. This strategy is high level. It's a high level document, and I've got the same concerns about this document. I'm not concerns, but reservations about how to put it into practice. For those of us at the working bench level, brilliant high level strategy, something to be built on, but we talk about commissioning and contracting. As a charity, we were receiving a grant from Morecambe Bay CCG. In terms of commissioning and contracting now at the ICB level, what does it mean to me? How do I now get my bid in terms of getting some form of support from the ICB, especially when we're talking about the whole system approach? And for running a hydrotherapy service at the far reach of our geography, it's not going to be a whole system approach, because I can't offer necessarily reasonable hydrotherapy services to people in Blackpool, Burnley, or even Preston because of the distances involved. So to look at it from that point of view, we need to know how it works in practice. And I look forward to engaging, presumably with Jane Cass at the ICB, to how we, as one of those charities at a place level, fit into this. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thanks very much, Colin. Lucy.
Hi, yes, thank you. So I suppose this follows on a little bit from what Angela and Colin said. So there's a lot in here about supporting the sector. And my comment would be around providing opportunities to upskill, you know, the grassroots charities and communities, so that they're able to bid for work those tenders. And I think my organisation is springing into action, but I'm here representing Selnet at the moment, who have a lot of members who possibly wouldn't be able to, or wouldn't feel confident in bidding for that. And perhaps there's a need to provide some sort of programme around training and upskilling around how to partner with other organisations within the sector, who's going to be the lead, and how to just tender, because there's a lot of talk around, being able, it doesn't matter, you can be an SME, you can be a charity to tender, but in reality, how many of those small groups are getting funding or can put that together? So I think that's needs to be a consideration as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. This is all contributing to how we actually make this real and this implementation plan. And I'm getting a real theme here, which is really helpful. I've just noticed Angela popped something in the chat about that, and we were talking about this at the East Lancashire group yesterday about training programs and leadership development, and how can we do this as a sector. So thank you very much for that. We've got David Allen and then Maggie Moody.
Thanks again, Joe. Yeah, so I haven't seen all of this document before in its togetherness, but some bits of it are ringing bells. There's a few questions in my mind, I think. The elephant in the room, of course, is resource. There's quite a lot of reference in the document to making sure that the VCFSE sector is financially sustainable, that there are equally that there are it says financially resilient sector that is resourced. It talks about growing the VCFSE sector. So the question really is about, when do we begin to see a transfer of resource as part of that firm commitment to those elements of the sector? I've been involved in Morecambe Bay and health system for some time now, and we've heard a great deal about equal partnerships, and I believe that that's the aim. But the challenge that I've had certainly has been there's a limit to what I can do without any resource. So I pick up Colin's point around contracting and commissioning. I would also like to see grants referenced. Local authorities have already moved that way, and a lot of the contracting and commissioning arrangements within the NHS exclude a lot of smaller voluntary organisations. In South Cumbria, there's around 1,000 registered charities. 60% of those are operating on less than £10,000 a year. They do not have the paid resource to enter into commissioned arrangements. So we either need to have an infrastructure that's properly funded that can help coordinate that, to give access to those resources and assets at community level, or NHS and local authority need to combine together to make sure that that's done. So, it's a little bit like the promises in the long-term plan around radical upgrades to public health. We never saw that. We never saw a shift from acute to prevention. And my question really is about, when will we begin to see a shift of resource from acute to prevention, from centre to place, from clinical to social models? It's that kind of great words, but when will we get to that point of proper resource sharing? Two-way resource sharing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Again, really speaking to this sort of implementation plan, so thank you for that. Moving on to Maggie Moody, please, and then we'll go to Ammar Abbas and Donna Hussein.
Hi. I just wanted to pick up the question around representation. There's been a lot of discussion that I've been involved with regards to that, and I note in the partnership agreement it talks about appointing representatives who have a mandate, and I just wondered whether there'll be consistency across the partnership with regards to what those mandates look like, and how we will review the effectiveness of those representatives. Partly for my own benefit and for the benefit of, as David was saying, of some of the really small organisations and ensuring effective communications, but also just recognising at the end of the day that if it's an individual who's representing and for whatever reason they're not available, or how would that be then passed on to someone else who perhaps didn't have their experience or knowledge or the connections that individual had made. So maybe we have a deputy. I'm not quite sure whether that would be feasible, but somebody who would pick that up in that circumstance. I also am just wondering how we could effectively support those representatives to be enabling those effective communications. I think it's a huge sector, and it's a huge task for whoever that poor soul is who's got that job. So I think we need to sort of think about how we can best support them with maybe technological solutions or similar. The only other point with regards to representation I just wanted to make was just with regards to transparency, with regards to commissions and tenders. That person potentially could be under some scrutiny or criticism if they then are successful in securing a contract, likely through a completely transparent process at the end of the day. But I just wanted to make sure that we protect that organisation and that individual from any possible accusation of positioning themselves potentially.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Maggie. And I think that's goes to a lot of quite a lot of the issues with the concept of representation, doesn't it? And I think that was why we, perhaps not quite eloquently enough, made that distinction between organisational involvement and sectoral involvement. I think that's an important point. So if I can just summarise, your questions were around representation. Your question was about, is there going to be a common approach? There was also, how will this be reviewed? And importantly, how will those people be supported? Redundancy in representation in case it relies on one person. And then transparency and process wrapping around it to avoid any sort of impropriety or conflict of interest. Would that capture what you said, Maggie? Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that would be a really good summary. I think it was just for me about evidence. And if we're going to be a critical friend, but just about evidence of how that organisation or individual has actually listened and is representing the voice of the wider sector.
Okay, perfect. Just on that note, one of the developments for that Lancashire and South Cumbria ICS website page that we've got, apologies to the people who've got their hands for waiting, is that we will be listing where the opportunities are and who's currently filling what. And then we can figure out where are there any gaps, and then we can, I think that will allow us to start to see what processes need to be wrapped around that. Thank you. Abbas, thank you for waiting.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning to everyone. I'm Mark here from Youth Action in Blackburn. 2 points. One was essentially what Maggie was talking about. So thanks, Maggie, for kind of eloquently discussing the issue about representation and accountability. One of the things I was thinking is about the challenges of having a few people having such a broad responsibility in terms of representation. One option could be, as Maggie suggested, deputizing, have deputies. Or the other approach could be having thematic leads. So you could have a one for BAME communities, one for young people, one for carers, for example. I know the list can be quite endless, but I think we'll have to have some kind of limit to it at some point, so that they could focus on thematic areas, whilst the other leads can focus on generic things. Because I think whilst it's important that we have representation, I think it's really important that the representatives are informed and have some kind of experience, lived experience, or professional experience of those niche sectors, because that's really important. And one of the things I was thinking about in the document, thanks Mike for sharing the document as well, is that it talks about under shared values, the 4 key areas, and I agree with them in total, but it talks also about equitable and inclusive, and which is really good and it's really positive. And it talks about the sector being inclusive and the NHS being equitable in terms of our participation. However, it doesn't talk about inequity within the sector as well. So, for example, research has proven, and there's many evidences there, that the certain types of communities, so for example, if you look at the Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth, there's a heavy underrepresentation, there's significant inequity built in within systems. not by us, but these are historic systems and values that we've been carrying for decades. So again, I think something a bit more explicit in the document, that we're not only going to be inclusive, but we're also going to be explicitly inclusive within the sector itself in terms of representation and how those communities then can feed back in. So I'll give the example from my experience, from a lived experience, from a BAME perspective. This document doesn't talk about my communities at all. So that's just what to add that in. Thank you.
Really helpful, thank you, Emma. So again, just to clarify, we were talking about inequity within the sector. Are you saying that needs to be recognised within this document? And then I think you were saying that inclusivity from a representation perspective does need to be specifically addressed within this document. Am I right?
Yeah, so in terms of, in order to support Maggie's position in terms of the deputizing, you do deputizing, but if you had a thematic area, you could then also have the inclusive part of it, I think.
Right.
But if we don't have the deputy and we don't have the thematic leads, I do think an explicit reference to, for example, in my experience, Black Lives Matters and Black and minority ethnic communities, and there'll be other communities like that as well. It needs to be a bit more explicit in the document.
Thank you, Emma. Moving on to Donna Hussain, then Tracy Hopkins, then Peter Lumsden.
Thanks, Joe. I've read, obviously, the documents. I love the strategy, but I agree with what Colin said earlier. I do think it's really ambitious. It's more like a wish list. And it is, I think Dave Allen said it as well, about some of it being familiar. I know we've had the Marmot review, but some of us remember the Marmot review from 2014 as well. And the same thing around reduction in inequalities and inequity was said then, and inequalities have actually gone wider, and so has inequity since that. I'm just really conscious that we're not going to make the same mistakes as what happened last time, because it is very familiar. If you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. The joint commitments are ambitious, and I'm just wondering, the strategy is good, like I said, but usually within a strategy, there's also some idea around capacity, and I know your implementation plan comes after, but within your strategy, like work together to achieve a permanent reduction in inequalities and inequity within Lancashire, South Cumbria, addressing the social, environmental, structure and economic determinants of health and well-being. So when that was set out, there's usually a narrative underneath to say, and this is how we're going to think we're going to do this, because we have X amount of resources within the sector, X amount of organisations, blah, 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 before we even move on to implementation. That should be looked at the strategy design. It's all right coming out with all these things, which are brilliant, and I really do hope these are achieved, because it'd be better for everybody. But has any thought been given to how these strap lines are going to be done, and the resource that, say, like just that first one is going to take? Who is going to measure, or how is it going to be measured, about the reduction in inequalities and inequity, and to make sure that each area, social, environmental, structural and economic determinants are addressed? You know, there's a lot of work around that. Determinants of health and well-being. Also around, like, every single one, and I'm not criticising, because it's something I would love to, you know, put from an infrastructure perspective. It's what we should be doing. But like I said, I was there in 2014 as infrastructure when this all came out, and there was no thought process behind these, like the commitments, and there was no accountability either, even though it said then transparency, accountability, everything else. When I tried to, in specific with the CCG, said, well, you're talking about accountability, but you haven't actually done X, Y, and Z that you said you were going to do 2 years ago, it was just fobbed off. So what sort of accountability we're looking at. Is there going to be accountability, or are they just words to reassure us at this point, but then they're going to get lost somewhere down the line when everybody's battling to reduce inequalities and reduce inequity?
Okay, powerful stuff. Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I don't have a succinct answer to that, but I think it's definitely part of how do we make this real. And I think that's the sort of careful, iterative process we're taking with this, is to make sure that it isn't just empty words. And I think, I don't want to put words in Jane's mouth, but I do think that that's the intention from the ICB as well, is that this isn't just empty rhetoric. I have to say, this isn't a strategy. This is a partnership agreement.
Yeah, exactly.
That will flow.
It is ambitious, isn't it? I mean, you've actually put in, you know, it's a commitment to permanently reduce inequalities, you know, and probably everybody here is like me. If I'm going to commit to something, I really want to work on what we're committing to, you know, rather than forget about what's on here and be doing something else, you know, and committing myself to that. But it's, like I said, it's usually when you're doing a strategy, you work from the bottom up. What's the problem? Yeah, we know there's inequality and inequity. But then the next step is, so what do we have within the VCFSE and NHS? What resources, you know, assets do we have to be able to do something about it? And maybe, you know, where it says permanent reduction, maybe it could have said reduce inequalities within the next 2 years with what we've got. We've not even looked at properly what we've got, what assets we've got. And I'm just saying it's an ambitious commitment when we don't even, there's been no real look at, can we reach it? We've gone from top down again, rather than bottom up and seeing what we've got to be able to make any changes. We've gone from, this is what we need to do, now let's do it, rather than this is what we need to do and taking it in steps. We jump all the time instead of, I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly, you know, I know what I mean, but instead of saying, yeah, we need to reduce inequalities and inequity, it's massive. But we've got X, Y, and Z, so we can make a dent in it in the first year. We can make an even bigger dent the second year. At the same time, we're feeding back on information that we're gathering along the way and best practice, you know, etc. Also, I just want to quickly comment on what Emma said earlier around the BAME community. And I agree with some of what he said, but some of the services are universal, whereas some BAME communities just specifically are around BAME and not around the non-BAME. So we work with families, it's universal, whether they're LGBT, ethnic minority, it doesn't matter if you're a family, you need support, we work with you. We've adopted cultural competence, you know, equality and diversity, intersectionality, put a lot of time and effort into that to make sure that we can give individual families what we say we do, tailor-made action plans. Now, when it comes to something like this, we miss out on a lot of stuff as extra resources that could benefit those families, because they go to BAME communities that may be, and I'm only giving us as an example, not expert in family support. So it's always one or the other, you know, and that's no disrespect to BAME, because they do a lot of work and quite rightly they get the resources. But it's like we can't tap into any extra resources. So there's an inequality there within the support as well.
Okay, thanks, Donna. I know the feeling when you say it. I'm trying to explain this. I think we're getting what you're saying, but I will come back to you offline if you don't mind about a couple of points I've written down.
That's what you usually do, Joe.
Yeah. All right. Perfect, thank you. Let's move on to Tracy and then Peter Lumsden, and then there's one more hand gone up. That's the last hand that we'll take on this for now. So Tracy next, please.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, really interesting discussion, and I think it is kind of bringing out a couple of themes for me. I mean, one of the key ones is around representation, and how really the way in which we create the mechanisms and the structures for representation is something we still have to do. So this partnership agreement doesn't talk to that at the moment. The work that we're doing around looking at how we restructure the alliance, looking at how that we make sure we do some of the things that exist within this agreement around understanding how we need representatives, whether it's thematic representatives, whether it's people who come with certain understandings of certain communities in the way Donna has just described, is vitally important. But we haven't got that yet. This is the kind of the start of the why we need to work together. So this does outline the reasons why. And I just want to kind of like talk a little bit about that ambition, I suppose, because it's deliberately ambitious in its kind of scope. And I think, you know, if I look at my own sort of experience working in a town like Blackpool that has the worst health inequalities, certainly across Lancashire and South Cumbria, possibly across England, and how we as a sector can contribute such a huge amount to addressing those health inequalities, I actually see this agreement as an opportunity to do that. And I think that's really important, because if we didn't set out our really ambitious vision for this, and it very much falls in line with the ambition that the ICB has across their strategy. It talks about addressing health inequalities. It talks about making services more equitable. So I think we're coming together with a really clear ambition of what we want to achieve. And personally, I think we have to try and do that. And of course, we're doing that against a backdrop of less resources, you know, more inequalities right across the board in our communities. But I'm absolutely clear that if we're going to make the difference that we need to make, then this ambition is absolutely right. I think also when we talk about how we're going to do this, so this agreement is the why. Why do we need to? It also talks about the how. How are we going to come together? We haven't even started talking about the what yet. And I think that's where probably many of you, like me, really want to get down to those. What are we going to do? What's going to change? It's okay talking about, you know, having transparency. We started this conversation with Dave saying, I don't want to tell the NHS what I'm doing because they'll go and pinch my idea. We have to get to the stage of where we're talking about what it is we're going to do. That isn't going to happen at the Lancashire and South Cumbria level. That will happen at place. And I'm absolutely clear that when we start looking at where the sector can meet some of the challenges within those place-based partnerships, and we're already setting priorities at place, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the next part of the meeting, that is where we will start to make some decisions about resource allocation, about who's doing what, about what we need to achieve. From that, very much based on need. And that's what's happening at the moment at place. We're looking at across each of the places at what is needed and how we can come together and deliver services that actually develop those communities, that deliver the things that those communities need. So to me, what we've got here is an agreement that's going to be signed next week by us as a sector, by the ICB, that says, okay, this is the why we're going to do this, and this is part of the how we're going to do it together as partners. But there's a lot more work to do yet, and I think everybody's really articulating that so well, and it's really great to hear that, because there's absolutely no doubt that all of us have an obligation at place to get involved within that work and make sure that actually the voices of our communities, the needs of our communities are front and centre when those place-based plans are developed.
Thanks, Tracy. Peter Lumsden next, and then final word from Dave Clayton.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Joe?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, 3 quick comments then. First of all, on the back of what Tracy said, I just want to acknowledge the work that Tracy, Angela, yourself, and others have done to bring us to this point. And you know, this is a partnership agreement, you know, principles and things there, but it does strike me as somebody who's a relative newcomer to this whole area that it does feel to be a better relationship, a stronger, closer relationship. There are some personal relationships formed, I'm sure, although I think there's quite a bit of educating of the ICB itself as to the nature of the VCFSE, that we're not a free service, that we're not all volunteers. People such as yourself, Joe, are paid to do this. So a bit more perhaps around them viewing the VCFSE as equal partners. The second thing, picking up what Dave Allen said about funding and wording specifically in this document, under the ICB commitments, I just have a little bit of caution around the vagueness of some of the words there. You know, we'll support this, the infrastructure of the VCFSE where we can, and then we commit to appropriate and proportionate procurement processes. So I just think I just wonder whether it's possible for any of that language of the ICB commitments around funding to be firmed up a bit, made a bit stronger. I'm not sure. And the third comment around representation, yeah, I think one of my ongoing sort of bugbears is that there's not enough input from the VCFSE into the structures of the ICB. But having said that, and Tracy talked, you know, eloquently there about place, and Angela and myself were at the Blackburn with Darwin VCFSE steering group planning meeting yesterday. I think there's, you know, that last comment was aimed at the ICB. This one, I'm talking about us as a sector. I think it's incumbent on us to take the opportunity that as we develop alliances at place, you know, Blackburn, Blackpool, Lancashire, whatever that's going to look like, but there's an opportunity there for us to look afresh at how we involve very small organizations. And we may even need to think about going down, you know, to much more local level. You know, I think there's stuff around the primary care networks that we could be doing some much more local engagement and getting representation. So those are my observations, Joe.
Thanks very much, Peter. Helpful as always. I can't believe you're describing yourself as a newcomer. Anyway, Dave Layton, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just keep this quick. And I don't envy your job, Joe, I'll be honest. But in terms of the agreement, okay, so evaluation, I think, is key. We need something from the NHS to basically say, look, we will help you evaluate your work, whatever that work is, and how that impacts the NHS. I think that is vital, because that's our future, that's our funding, and how we can prove that the work that we do impacts the NHS, because at the moment there's very little out there. You know, reducing mental health, reducing this, reducing that, you know, that is what we need. And I feel a commitment from the NHS, you know, to help us build that, you know, whether it's with local universities, the NHS and the project, I think is really key, because no matter what happens with this agreement, if we've got that, we can go off and do our own things, you know what I mean? Saying, look, we can impact this and we can do this, you know what I mean? And it's proven that we can reduce X, Y, and Z. You know, I think that's a vital commitment that is much needed, because as a sector, we're not useless, but we don't speak in the language of commissioners, a lot of us, and we need an academic, like I've got an academic background, but you know, there's a lot of us out there who don't have that academic background to support an argument, and we're very much, you know, find ourselves running projects, managing this, managing that, and have very little time to produce some proper evaluative work to support the work that we do. So I think that is key, and if there's a commitment there, that'd be amazing. The second thing I think is jobs. So there's a big issue at the moment, and I feel again, if there's a commitment from the NHS to create some sort of jobs where we can refer the people we work with, you know, into the NHS to get that more lived experience in the NHS. And I noticed Red Rose Recovery wasn't here. That model of working, you know, that lived experience workers and in these places, you know, I think that's another thing, a pipe dream, you know what I mean? That is very much wishful thinking, but I feel there is something there around jobs. And if the NHS are looking to recruit or train or do whatever, then actually look at the people we work with. You know, we've already given the skills in all these X, Y, and Z, you know, employability and all that they don't often get from a school, or they're not engaged from the school. And you've got the learning disabilities, autism, care leavers, you know, you've got all these people who don't get opportunities to get a job within the NHS. You know what I mean? I think that would be amazing. But again, very much elsewhere. In terms of the problems, I kind of disagree with, you know, this is a top-down approach, because the problems from the bottom is we're competing with the NHS. But what we lack is where do we send the people that we work with to the NHS? You know, do we send them to social service, health service, mental health service, A&E? You know what I mean? Whatever is discussed between us as community organisations and the people we work with, whether that be old, young, whoever it is, families, you know, there's a whole structure needed which isn't really there, I feel, or there is and it's not aware of, that we can easily refer people into services. But, you know, as equally to that, you know, the waiting times in GPs and all that, we can help massively there, because we can stop them going to GPs, you know, stop them doing that, because we actively talk to them at this level. And if we can provide them the support where they don't need to go to the GPs and that, I think that is key, by getting workers to come to us in our environments and to speak to these, which is, you know, we're venturing onto the what's, you know, the next, you know, the further steps kind of thing. But, you know, they're the sort of the problems that we're trying to address in this partnership agreement, not problems at the top, you know, the problems at the bottom of referrals and signposting and support, which leads me on to money. We can access pots that they can't. So we can bring money into the NHS, but we need the support in the bids, you know, and say, look, this NHS department is working with us on this project. Let's bring some money in, some national money in. We can fund workers in the NHS to deliver projects in communities. We can fund our own work. We can fund other work. You know what I mean? There's that method of working, which is a very different way of working, but we're finding that being more relevant now, because councils, you know, NHS and, you know, various other things.
Dave, I'm going to cut you off. I think you've made some really good points, and I think I've seen a lot of nods, but we do have to move on now. So I'm going to thank everybody for that conversation, and move us on to a what's the word I'm looking for? The next section, which is around a quick update on the development of the place partnerships from VCS perspective. So we've got Terry Stevenson first, because she needs to leave early from the meeting, on the Lancashire place-based partnership. We've got Tracy Hopkins and possibly David Houston. Although I did see his name, but I can't see him on the table anymore. Angela Allen around Blackburn with Darwin, and then I think it's going to be David Allen for South Cumbria. So if we'll go to Terry Stevenson first, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies that I have to leave early, and also apologies because I should have checked with Joe how much detail he wanted. So you might get too much, you might not get enough. The chances of me going Goldilocks on this and getting it just right are fairly slim, so Joe will nudge me if I'm talking too much. Okay, so Lancashire interim place board, and it is interim at this stage while we work out whether we sit elsewhere. So for example, should the place board sit with the Lancashire Health and Wellbeing Board? So at the moment it is very much an interim group. So we've had, I think, 4 meetings so far, so still quite early days. Latest meeting was just this week, and And thank you to those who responded to my email that went out through this group for input. Your feedback has been fully shared by email, and the highlights were given at the place board this week. It's important, I think, to note the voice that we've got and the commitment of others, especially, but not only, including people like Louise Taylor, to our work and hearing our voice in an earlier way and meaningful way. And there's genuine commitment at the place board to doing that with the voluntary sector. So this week's papers, or this month's papers, so we were talking about delegation to place from board, and that there is a real aim to get the decision making to the closest point of delivery. So really not holding on to that stuff in a big chunked up way, but really pushing that so that the decisions can be made, you know, at the closest point of delivery in communities. Also recognition that we don't want to start from scratch and that we want to capitalise on some of the really good work that's already happening across Lancashire. So not just wiping the slate clean and starting again. Fund delegation is still being discussed. So, you know, a few people, including David, have mentioned about charity sustainability and when money will get passed down, etc. So there will no doubt be commissions, but at this point they won't directly be coming from the Lancashire Place Board, because the fund likely will be delegated from 24-25 when we've fully established what that will look like and the scope of that delegation that will come down. So we also talked about feedback from the recent engagement events for those who attended, and actually there was a really good summary from those. So I've asked that that's shared across the sector, so that should be coming across quite soon. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't think it's there. We also had a paper on impact and reporting frameworks, or starting to understand what the place board will be looking at, what success looks like and how we monitor that. Also talked about the boundary issues and people living kind of on boundaries, overlaps with the PCNs, etc. So they're not new issues, but just recognising that they are issues that need to be taken into account as we do planning. There will be 3 clinical and professional roles recruited for Lancashire, so 3. So there will be the East, the Central and the West. Those ads will go out imminently, and they're going to play an intrinsic role in primary care and partnership working across all of Lancashire. So there will be 3 really key roles that will be from a clinical background, and they're going out to ads. Well, they haven't gone out other than Monday, but they're imminent. There was an initial paper proposal around how we involve people and communities, so how we properly consult and they can influence what's happening at place. So there's going to be a lot more work on that, but I think what the feeling, and I attended a separate group about how we do that, and I think the feeling was that we recognise the scale of Lancashire, but that if we don't do something, even if it's small, we're never going to get going. So actually, even if we start this quite small initially, that can then start to grow. So then we talked about the partnership contributions. So your input was really useful there. So that was about our ask as a sector and our contribution. So as I said, I've shared all of that in writing, but gave high level, including things like, you know, stop coming to us at the last minute with money that you desperately need to spend. Let's be a bit more strategic about it all. So that all of that was heard. One of the things that came out that was really interesting was there is real commitment to adopting a VCFSE first approach when considering how money is allocated. So I think that should be music to our ears, that actually there is a recognition that it should be a VCFSE first approach when money is allocated. So I will make sure that that stays nice and high on the agenda, because I love that that's a commitment. And I also liked that in the room that wasn't being talked about, because sometimes I get really bothered that the voluntary sector is talked about as cheap, and I don't like that. And actually, that's not how it was being described at all. It was just being described actually as an efficient use of resource, and I'm good with that. Talked also about the speed of change and the need for some quick wins. What I was saying was the voluntary sector at the moment are really engaged, really keen to get engaged. But whilst we're also saying that some of the work that's going to take place at Place could take years to really come to fruition, but actually what we don't want to do is to lose the whole of the sector, because they just think, oh God, we've heard that again, we've spoken, nothing's changed. So really understand that we need to get some quick wins, so that everybody can see that their voice has been heard and change will bring. And the final thing from me on that is that if you don't know, Heather Crozier has been appointed to replace Hilary Fordham as the integration place leader for North Lancashire, and she'll be in post from the 22nd of May. So Joe will give me a thumbs up, either. What the hell were you thinking, Terry? That is not what I asked for. If there's any questions, you're probably going to be quite limited on time, but I'm happy anybody can email me. I have no problem with that if anybody does have any questions.
That's great. No, thank you, Terry. And I don't envy others having to follow you with the feedback from other areas. So no, thank you. Perfect level of detail. Jane Cass, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, Terry, I'll keep this really brief because I know that you need to leave, as do I. Really helpful to hear that feedback. Louise is really keen for this partnership agreement to go to the next Lancashire Place board meeting, and for some consideration too. So what would that then look like at Place? So brilliant if you and I can catch up in advance to that, to think through the presentation of that, because you were part of that workshop as well when we designed the draft. So it'd be great to kind of present that together.
Absolutely, yeah, just make contact, please. I'll pop my email in the chat for anybody that wants it.
Thanks, Terry.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Terry. And moving on now to Blackburn with Darwen. Throw to Angela Allen, please.
Why didn't you start with somebody else? How am I going to compare to Terry? Anyway, okay. So there's been lots happening in Blackburn with Darwen. Obviously, we split from the Pennine area. So East Lancs got their own strategy that they're pulling together for the VCFSE sector, and Blackburn with Darwen, we're striving ahead. So in terms of the VCFSE work specifically, we've had 2 workshops to date to kind of align our, what is it that we are going to look like, what do we want, and how we're going to work in partnership with our local statutory partners. And we had a task and finish group yesterday that Peter has referenced. And that's looking at an event that's going to take place in June that Community CVS are managing. So hopefully the outcome from that meeting will be a new leadership group for the sector in Blackburn with Darwen that won't just be focusing on the health and well-being kind of work, but we'll be looking much more broadly than that. So we'll be looking at how we link with the local authority, with NHS partners, with the LEP, with education, etc., etc. So part of this agenda, part of it will be this agenda, and but hopefully that group will be broader than that. And then in terms of the actual place-based partnership, so in Blackburn with Darwen, we had something that was called the Local Integrated Care Partnership, otherwise known as LICP. Worst acronym ever. That has now become the Blackburn with Darwen place-based partnership, and Vicky Shepherd from AGK and myself were kind of legacy representatives on the previous LICP. I'm not going to say it. So we are still the nominated reps, although we've got to go through an election process to get new reps, or to whether Vicky and I will stay on, I don't know. Anyway, that's by the by. So we had a meeting of the place-based partnership this week, and the focus was, as it was with Terry and the Lancashire group, the delegation and devolution of responsibility and funding into place. And obviously that's not going to happen until next year, but you know, each place needs to know what its priorities are and how that money should be spent. So we discussed that in great detail. We have affirmed the terms of reference for that group, and we have been focusing on the neighbourhood reviews. So we've got the primary care networks and the integrated neighbourhood teams, making sure that VCFSE voice and representation is within those groups, but equally that there's a feedback mechanism from those groups into the broader VCFSE sector. The other thing that we have discussed is the health and wellbeing strategy and the joint strategic needs assessment, and how all of those strategies fit together and what the commonalities are between them all. So that's it from me. Happy to take any questions, but equally happy to move on to Tracy, was it?
Thanks, Angela. I think there's quite a lot of synergy, isn't there, in terms of what's happening at Place. And Angela said she wasn't going to do as thorough a job as Terry, and she did an absolutely sterling job there. So I'm feeling a bit like, how do I follow both of you now? Yeah, there are a lot of similarities around what's happening at Place. So, and one of the things that I think is really kind of panning out in Blackpool is that relationship between the Health and Wellbeing Board and the place-based partnership, because there's always been quite a lot of question marks and probably some duplication as well, particularly in representation on both of those groups' boards. So I'm really pleased that the kind of the plan and the implementation of the place-based plan going forward is being adopted by the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the plan that they traditionally develop with the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment is very much going to be integrated within that one strategy, that one set of priorities for Blackpool as a place. So it seems to be coming together and it makes more sense. One of the things that's happening in developing a set of priorities and ensuring that certainly the voice of the VCFSE is very much kind of integrated within that process is there's been a number of visioning events, and there's one on the 15th of May that is for the VCFSE. I think there's around about 16 organisations that have signed up to that so far in Blackpool. And this is led by Karen Smith, who's the Director of Integrated Health and Care, and Karen Tordoff as well, who works very closely with Karen Smith. And they are asking us as a sector to come together and really look at how this plan addresses the needs that we're very familiar with and have our input into that. So I think that's a really positive step forward. In terms of the kind of leadership group form and dynamic, we are very conscious that we're waiting really to see how all of that is going to kind of be redeveloped and restructured. I think what we've got in Blackpool is a legacy, like in many areas, of a leadership group that covers the wire and filed areas, which used to be the place-based footprint. So I think it's important that we make sure that we don't lose that connection with wire and filed, which is really important for us as kind of a geography, but equally make sure that as a leadership group, the voices of those communities that are really kind of disadvantaged in Blackpool are absolutely heard within the plans that we're making going forward. I was hoping David Houston was going to be here. I know David did join the meeting, but he had to leave to feedback on what's called the Fylde Coast Primary and Integrated Neighbourhood Care Transformation Group. Nice snappy title there. And this is the group that's really looking at moving primary care networks into that, as Angela said, that integrated neighbourhood teams kind of set up. And I know there's been quite a lot of work as well looking at the resources that are going into primary care locally and how we as a sector can become more integrated within those neighbourhood teams and how those resources can facilitate some of that work. So, you know, we're involved as an organisation in my kind of day job in terms of working with social prescribers across primary care, and those social prescribers are employed in the voluntary sector. So that's just one example of the way in which integrated neighbourhood teams can develop, where we as a sector very much receive resources to facilitate some of that work. I think there are other things happening that really kind of match the work of the integrated care partnership as well. So you'll probably be aware, or if you're not, I think we can now send out the strategy for the ICP. And what we're doing at Place is very much mirroring those life courses within that strategy. So the starting well, living well, working well, dying well model is something that's been adopted in Blackpool as well. And I think going back to the previous conversation, it is that strategy that talks about all the inequalities and how we're going to address them. And I think it's that strategy really going forward that, as we set priorities at Place, will be a way in which we can lever resources to ensure that those priorities that we know about very well when we work in frontline services in the community are addressed, and that the challenges that we face, which are different in Blackpool than they are in Blackburn, or than they are in Kendal, but we recognise that the priorities that we set have to absolutely talk to those needs within our communities. And of course, we play a key role as a sector in making sure that happens. So that's it for me. There are kind of other things as well that are going on at Place that I think those of you who are based in Blackpool will probably know about and be feeding into, but that's kind of the summary, I suppose, from me. Thanks. Who am I handing over to now?
A very pink David Allen. David Allen's gone all pink on my screen.
Yeah.
How strange.
David.
Thank you. Yeah, I like pink. It's I always think I look best in pink. Sort of a light mauve at my end, at least. So I thought I'd break my feedback into three areas. Firstly, around the content on the last South Cumbria Place-based partnership. Secondly, around some current issues that are going on. And thirdly, around opportunities and comparisons with some of the work we do in North Cumbria, because I think we can learn from the switch across two ICSs and the fact that we cover two ICPs. So the last meeting was the second place-based partnership meeting. Jane Scattergood in the lead. And for those who don't know, Jane reports to two bosses. So she's got a link back directly to the ICS in health and Kevin Lavery, but she also reports to Sam Plum, who is the newly appointed Chief Exec of Westmoreland and Furness Unitary Authority. And that's really important because what Sam's doing is she's establishing Director of Health and Social Care Integration posts, which are both NHS and local authority. So that's really important, I think, in terms of living the message. The last meeting picked up, it was predominantly a setup meeting, a get to know you session. There was probably about 50 people in the room, I would guess. It talked about 6 draft priorities for Place. We picked up the points around life course approach, which seems to be part of the national push. We talked about the ICB's transformation programme that Jerry Hawker's leading, and the fact that Jane Scattergood, who's the South Cumbria Director of Place, is leading on community engagement work on behalf of the ICS. So it'd be good to know if there are other directors who are doing similar other strands. And finally, we picked up around some of the draft governance structures that are being proposed. It is complicated for reasons I'll come back to. Some of the stuff I'd heard at that meeting, which I fed back to some colleagues in the Furness Third Sector Health Group, they're starting to talk about warranted variation rather than just about equity or inequity, which is really positive, I think, because it talks about being able to load resource to areas of high deprivation. Secondly, there was a push to talk about care across the whole life course, not just to older people. The standard stuff around hospital discharge problems and the lack of capacity in social care was highlighted. And what was really interesting was, and you'd expect this in a new group, but local authority and NHS hadn't met each other, literally had not met each other as individuals, but nor did they know that the unitary authority had already established working group streams looking at community power and community wealth building that are now quite advanced. So they think, you know, I put a message in the chat, there's a tendency for NHS to feel it's the central body and the lead body without realizing other bits of the system have been doing some of this stuff for a long time, or that there are other strands that are already in place. And I speak as an ex-NHS employee. In terms of current issues then, second area, it's a bit complex for us because there's 3 groups that feed into this, or there's 2 that feed in and a third that seems to exist. The first is that we have an Action for Health network for Cumbria. They met this week, about 50 people came along. The key focus for that group was around the ICC third sector representatives that we've got. These are mostly chief execs of health organisations in the voluntary sector. We've got 16 of them that are based on the governance model for all the ICCs in North Cumbria. We haven't got that opportunity yet in the south, but we'd like to have it. Anyone who's interested, I can share the governance model that we've got through to the ICS and at place within the ICP. The second group is the Furness Third Sector Health Group. I met with them on the 14th of March. This is a group of 21 health organisations in the Barrow and Furness area. There was a third group that met on the 9th of March, which I know Tracy was able to attend. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get in actually to that meeting, though I would have liked to. The process for that is unclear to me, but we will be holding and hosting an event in South Lakeland ourselves coming up very soon. The Action for Health network has got about 850 members across Cumbria. This is part of the third sector network in Cumbria. So at the moment, that's my default go-to group. But clearly local groups like Furness and South Lakeland groups will also want a voice. Quite how we'll work that in collaboration with the unitary authorities is a real challenge. On Cumberland side, they're looking at it quite differently. They're setting up 8 community panels. On Westmoreland side, which includes South Cumbria and Eden, of course, which is part of North Cumbria ICS, they're looking at establishing 3 groups, what was Old Eden, South Lakeland and Barrow. There's a complete lack of clarity for me, at least, over how Eden will be dealt with under the health and local authority boundaries. I know that there is talk of overcoming boundary and referral issues, and I'm sure it will be, but it's a bit disconcerting if you can't get an answer on it. But we can't get one at the moment. We will continue to work on it. And I think a couple of other things in terms of local current issues. As mentioned, the hospital discharge, we're doing quite a lot of work on that. And I think it's probably also worth mentioning that the Population Health Strategy Group, which I sit on for Morecambe Bay, as was, has also got access to £500,000 for investment in a variety of programmes, and I fed back to that Furness group on the agreed projects for that. I'm more than happy to send it to anyone who would like to know more about that. Finally, in terms of South Cumbria, we put a bid in. This was our 8th bid for a single post to be funded to help us with health partnership coordination across South Cumbria. It's a post we've got in the north, but not in the south. And we put in our 8th proposal in the last 2 years, which was rejected last week. That was to the Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust, which of course is a mental health trust. But we continue to discuss options on that. Thirdly, then, the potential linkage with North Cumbria. For those who don't know, CVS has been active in this area for about the last 4 years. We've currently got about £500,000 worth of funding directly into CVS, which pays for us to support referrals across the third sector, but also pays for health partnership development work. That in itself has led to over £3.5 million of investment from NHS, co-funded by Cumbria Community Foundation, investment directly into the voluntary sector. So we've got a referral system, and we've got funding coming in to pay for the work that gets done by the third sector as part of that referral system. So that's been extended into the new, for the rest of this year and next financial year, and we're putting in proposals to extend that further. We've currently got 6 third sector referral coordinators, some specialising in particular areas like mental health. I think probably the only other thing I would flag at this stage, it's a bit of a rattle, but I'll stop now, is we have put in a collaborative programme bid with Cumberland Council, which is relevant because it picks up on one of the colleagues' points around Health Equity Commission recently. This is a £5 million research programme into health determinants that Cumberland Council are putting forward, and they've been, I believe, they've been successful in obtaining that funding. So quite how that will link through into the voluntary sector, yet to be determined, but I'm pretty confident that it will do. They're very good at that collaborative angle. I'll shut up. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thanks very much, David. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is just a quick update on the task and finish groups that we launched after Assembly 2. So we've got Hospital Flow led by Tracy Hopkins. We've got Mental Health led by Angela Allen. Yak Patel's not here today, but he's leading the prevention stream, and I'm on the waiting well stream. So if we go in that order, obviously accepting Yak, just a very quick update, and then we can wrap. It's 11:44, so we'll keep this short. Just a quick update from those leads, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you. Tracy first.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it will be really brief. The group that I chair have met once, and the discussion was really useful. It was very kind of high level and strategic. Quite a small group to begin with, but as I've said, it is open to others to join. What we're focusing on is acute hospital discharge, so how we facilitate the transfer of care back into the community of people who are medically fit to leave hospital but aren't able to do so for a variety of reasons. We're not, as a group, looking at social care. We see that very much as something that is the local authority NHS kind of partnership and how people are transferred into social care placements. But what we are looking at is those other kind of economic, social issues that prevent people from returning to the home when they've had a stay in hospital. So things like where people's homes are not fit for them to return, maybe because they can't get about, maybe because their homes are cold, or they can't afford to buy food, or they've not got the right benefits in place, and those kind of issues that as a sector we're very conscious that we have some of the answers to and some of the solutions. So like I said, we've met once. We haven't put another date in the diary, but for the follow-up meeting, one of the things that the group asked me to do is look if there is a colleague on the ICB, a senior colleague, who would be prepared to come along and talk to us about some of those kind of issues firsthand and understand some of the issues that we have. So I've asked Maggie Oldham, who's the Deputy Chief Exec of the ICB and Director for Strategy and Performance. Maggie's very happy to come along. And I've also, on the back of this meeting, arranged a meeting with Asim Patel around looking at, Asim's the Director of Digital and Data for the ICB, because one of the question marks we had is around the data that we gather from patients that are in hospital. And I don't think there's any commonality across the system as to how this information is gathered. And it'd be really useful for us as a sector to understand who are the people who are in hospital beds and they're actually medically fit to leave. You know, even just some very generic data around age, why they were admitted, those kind of things. So we're talking about how that data could be shared, because I think that is part of the stumbling block that's preventing us from actually being able to take action locally with some of the patients who really do need our support. So that's where we're up to. I think this is really exciting stuff. I think this gives us the potential to do some of the things that we've talked about in this meeting, which is about levering in that funding. Of course, there's lots of examples of how funding is being levered into the sector across Lancashire and South Cumbria. I mean, David talked about North Cumbria just now. There's lots and lots of examples of how that's happening. But I think these groups are absolutely a place where we work up the proposals, where then we can actually have that conversation with the ICB about what resources we need to do this work.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Angela?
Hi, yes, me again. So we spoke about our group was to do with the hospital discharge and transfer of care for those with mental health issues. Again, only one meeting so far. Some of the things that we discussed was the wraparound care that's needed. So it's not just about providing psychotherapy support to those patients. It's actually helping them to resettle back into their homes and into their communities. So linking them in with social prescribing, supporting them with any housing, debt and welfare issues. So it's a real, you know, VCFSE response. We also talked about consideration for all, so not just the person or the patient themselves, but actually the implications for the wider family. Obviously funding, we need to look at that, and rather than just focusing on adults, it should be an all-age offer. At the moment, we've got two fairly good examples of what we're doing from a sector perspective. One of which is that we're supporting young people on ward in Blackburn Hospital and Blackpool Hospital who have been admitted with mental health issues, and VCFSE providers are actually going in there to help the nursing staff so that their time isn't taken up with looking after those young people. And that's going really well. So that's one good example. And then we've got another one which is called Bridge to Home, where we've got, again, VCFSE partners who are supporting patients on the ward itself. So getting to know the patients and then providing them with that bridge back into their community. So can we look at escalating both of those projects? We need to be assured that the quality, so have a standard of quality assurance for all delivery partners, because obviously if you're working with any NHS estate, you will be asked for those, you know, evidence of that. So could the VCFSE look at producing a quality assurance toolkit for this work? And we need to, and associated with that would be a training program. And then we need to agree a future action plan for the next 6 to 12 months. So I think we need to get, as Tracy has described, a lead from the system to come along and identify the key areas of need at the moment and the pressures that they're under, and whether there is a VCFSE response paid for that we could pull together.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So my task and finish group is called Waiting Well, and I'm not going to repeat what Angela and Tracy have said because the broad strokes are very similar. The ICB director who will be joining that team is called Jane Miller. She's director for urgent, emergency and planned care. Similar issues with accessing the data. However, what we're essentially going to be doing is art of the possible around waiting well. So how do people who are on waiting lists for certain procedures improve their resilience over that time, or wait well? And that looks at referral management, it looks at care pathways, and it will also look at what we already know works as a voluntary sector, what doesn't work so well, and what can be scaled critically. And the end point of this process in May for us is, here's what we think is the proposal, this is why we think it, and this is what we're going to need in order to progress. And that is both around data, information access, and obviously resources to proceed. So, but it will be a very much an art of the possible presentation with then right, if you want to go with this, here's what is needed to be done. In terms of how many are involved in that, there's 18 voluntary sector organisations in the Waiting Well group. And if others want to be involved in that, the expression of interest form is still on our ICS website. Okay. So in order to wrap us up, I'm just going to ask about volunteers. Again, I always ask for some help at the end of this. We're going to have generating an implementation plan for this partnership agreement. So we've already got a number of people who were involved. As I said, there was about 35 organisations who were involved in developing the partnership agreement. This implementation plan will also be shared. So if you want in on advising around the implementation plan and doing stuff and being involved, then please contact me, or indeed Stephanie, who's our business support here at Community Futures. There's also the standing offer to become involved in the task and finish groups to present information into those. And then just finally from me, I've discovered what the issue was today, why people have gone onto Teams and have not come onto Zoom. So just for future, for the avoidance of any doubt, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be setting the dates for the assembly for the rest of the year after this meeting. That will follow the Eventbrite process. So you will get a hold the date, you will get an invite through Eventbrite, all of the meeting packs and the links will be managed through Eventbrite. So anything else, forwards or anything from anybody else, that's not what we're doing. And I'm numbering the assemblies. So the first one was Assembly 1 launch, Assembly 2 was place, and Assembly 3 was partnership agreement.